Okay, so it's that time of year again where The Flash is over, so I think it's time to rank all 8 seasons, which is pretty crazy. Next year might be the last year we get to do this if Season 9 is the last season. I also did not get a chance to rank the 3 Batwoman seasons and also the 7 Legends of Tomorrow seasons since the show ended. Now that it's been so long since the show's ended, I don't know if I will, but if anyone would like to see them, let me know, and I would love to do them. But yeah, so The Flash. Disclaimer is that I haven't seen some of these seasons since they aired. I think from season 5 onwards, I have seen none of these shows other than like big, huge, important episodes since they aired. So my memory is not the best on a lot of these. I was intending to rewatch pretty much the entire Arrowverse once Flash and Superman and Lois wrapped up, because now we're on hiatus till October, till Stargirl returns. But I don't know, the whole Superman Lois not being on Earth Prime thing has kind of felt like a kick to that idea. Now I just don't know if I have the motivation to do it, because if I was doing it, I was going to do kind of a re-ranking of everything and then a ranking of all the Arrowverse seasons and stuff like that. But I'm not sure if I'm going to do that anymore, basically. But anyway, without further ado, let's rank the Flash seasons. So in 8th place, I have Season 7. And I said on my last ranking of these shows that Season 7 and Season 5 in my head go back and forth a lot in terms of like which I hate more or which I dislike more. That's kind of changed now. I think there's no conversation in my head anymore about that. I think Season 7 is by far the weakest season of the show, and I think that it's kind of no contest that it's weakest. Now, in the defense of this season, it visually looks very interesting. I don't think this season ever has a problem with being boring, which is kind of insane to say, because some of the other seasons on this list I do think have a problem with being boring at times. I don't think Season 7 is ever boring. I think it has some really interesting ideas, and it does kind of an interesting job at making the show look or seem kind of crazy from the outside. Like, if you're somebody who doesn't watch The Flash and you kind of hear what they're doing this season, you're like, wow, that sounds kind of interesting. I wouldn't mind seeing what they're doing. But from a writing standpoint, from a character standpoint, from every other standpoint that isn't, it looks cool, this season is absolutely abysmal. It's borderline unwatchable in my opinion of a Flash season. It's not just the worst season of The Flash, I think this is the worst season of DC TV. And I think the Speed Forces arc, which is around episodes, I think 8 to 12 or something like that, whatever number that graphic novel is, that's some of the worst television I've ever seen. I think that is absolutely ridiculously bad. Like, with the Speed Forces talking about how Barry and Iris are their parents and how they're all brothers and sisters and stuff, it's so stupid. It's genuinely insanely bad. I don't know how the hell this made it to air, because it is some of the worst that the Arrowverse has ever put out. But that's like the thing, and it's kind of the mode with a lot of this season, is that it looks cool, but it doesn't sound cool. It isn't written cool. There's nothing cool about it except for the fact that visually it looks pretty interesting. But even that goes so far when you have like the effects on some of the Speed Forces looking absolutely terrible. But this season is just all around really disappointing, because we finally delved into Godspeed in a huge way this season, and it ended up being very briefly like a 3-episode arc after the character had been hyped up for 3 years, and then that was done. We were done with him. Which is really disappointing, because I thought that they made the costume look awesome. The guy they had playing August Hart seemed like he had some pretty huge room to grow, and overall it was just not done in any way like I think a lot of us expected, and that was really disappointing. The show just, I don't know, it really dropped the ball here, and unfortunately I think Season 7 is the reason why a lot of people turned away from the show. I don't know that like Seasons 4 and 5 weren't the best either, and they turned a lot of people away, but I think Season 7 was the one that, for anybody who was on the fence, Season 7 was the season that made them go, okay, I think I'm done with this show. For me, Season 7 was not the show that made me leave, obviously, if I'm talking about ranking Season 8 and stuff, but it definitely made me reconsider if The Flash was a show that I did want to watch next season. And I'm somebody who loves to see shows through until the end. I've got like an obsession with making sure I see every DC show and DC movie and every Marvel show and every Marvel movie. Season 7 made me question if I wanted to continue with this show. That's how bad it was. But yeah. In 7th place, I have Season 5. So like I said, in my head, I went back and forth between if Season 7 was better or if Season 5 was better. That's not the case anymore. I think Season 5 is clearly the better season of the two seasons. my biggest issue with season 5 is the villain being Cicada, or I guess there's two cicadas, Orlin and then his daughter that I'm completely forgetting the name of. But I think they are the worst villains, or the worst main villains in The Flash. I think that they're by far the most boring villains in The Flash, and that's kind of the mode for a lot of this season, is that it's very, very, very boring. I think this season is very repetitive. We see the same thing happen over and over and over again. Nora as a main addition to the show was kind of a mistake, because it's kind of weird, because I think the actress plays Nora is actually great. She's in like Black Sails and some other stuff, and she's great in it. In this, though, I have no idea what they were going for with the character of Nora. It didn't work at all, and she felt like a very kind of pretty mediocre addition to the cast, I felt. I think that now she's working a lot better in the show now that she's in smaller doses, along with Bart. I think her and Bart together worked pretty great, but her on her own with Team Flash wasn't the best. The thing that worked with Season 5, though, was a lot of setup with Wells, and they seem to be, or not Wells, with Thawne, and they seem to be kind of setting up some interesting things. And another reason why this is better than Season 7 is because with Season 7 there was nothing on the horizon to hype us up. With Season 5, however, we had Crisis on Infinite Earths right around the corner, and a lot of what Season 5 was doing felt like it was going to be very important for Crisis. It ended up not being as important as we thought, but at the time it was really exciting, thinking, what are they going to do for Crisis? And I think that's what kind of keeps Season 5 above water slightly, but it's still definitely not a great season at all. In 6th place is Season 4, and this is the first season on the list that I don't hate. I think that this season gets very repetitive. It does a lot of things over and over again that aren't great, but overall, it's still an enjoyable season. It was definitely the first season where I kind of started to go, I'm not liking Flash as much as I used to be. For seasons 1 through 3, I was always making sure that I was, free to see the episodes. I would not go on like social media and stuff until I saw the episode in case there's spoilers. Now I don't really care about that anymore. But during season 4 was the first season where I think halfway through it I was like, I'm not as pushed to watch the episodes as they come out as I was with the last 3 seasons. And DeVoe was a very interesting villain, but honestly DeVoe seemed like a villain that would work better on The Flash today. Like if you put DeVoe in the way that the graphic novel arcs work on The Flash today, I think he would have been a much better villain, because having him for 23 episodes straight in season 4 was not great, and he was kind of a villain that very much overstayed his welcome. I also feel like it came in and out of what was good about him. Like the whole thing with the 12 bus metas, the fact that we really did have more or less 12 episodes almost right after each other of the same thing happening, where a new meta shows up, Team Flash tries to save them, then DeVoe shows up and steals their powers. Like that really did happen over and over and over again, and that was kind of unfortunate, because you make this season a little more interesting, you take out a lot of that repetitiveness, and you really would have had a good season going. And the season still had a lot of good things going for it. Barry being in prison was pretty cool, Wally being in the Flash suit was pretty cool. There were things that still worked in this season. There just wasn't near enough of it to make this a good season, but it's still not near as bad as what we had in the later years. In 5th place is Season 8. And now this is very, very, very kind of recent of a season. Like, I literally watched the final this morning. So I probably should have let this sit with me before I ranked seasons. But before making this, I was kind of unsure whether I preferred this to another season that is next on the list. But I think overall I'm pretty cool with putting this here, because I think that one thing that sets it apart from the other seasons that I'm about to have on this list is that this season has some extremely high highs, but then the highs are very few and far between. A lot of the middle part of season 8 is quite bland and uninteresting, I find. It's kind of similar to season 7, where it looks really cool, but it doesn't really translate that well to an interesting storyline. The Deathstorm storyline is like a perfect example of this, where I thought that was a great idea in theory, but the way that they ended up kind of executing it wasn't near as interesting as I think we all would have liked. I also think that the interlude episodes that were scattered throughout the season really do bring the overall quality down, and they're not as interesting as like Armageddon was, or like the final arc of the season was. Because Armageddon and the final arc of the season are fantastic, and some of the best stuff the show has had since season 2 in my opinion. But I think that there's a lot separating that sort of stuff, and the stuff separating it isn't near as interesting and isn't near as well done. Now, none of season 8 is as bad as what we get in like season 7 or 5. I just think a lot of what we get in season 8 can be a little boring and a little uninteresting. But like I said, Armageddon was fantastic, a really great way to start off the season. And the fact that this was intended to be the final season of the show really does kind of seep through at times, because it does feel like a lot of stuff happening in this season was very much kind of intended to wrap up characters, wrap up story arcs. And I think that if this ended up being the final season, while there would have been a lot of underwhelming stuff scattered throughout, it still would have been kind of more of a celebratory season than some of the other stuff we've seen in the Arrowverse so far. I think like Arrow is the prime example of a celebratory final season in my opinion, but I think Flash isn't that far below Arrow in terms of how it would have been celebrating, its past. And I think that was really well done. In fourth place, I have Season 6. And like I said, I've been in my head going back and forth between whether Season 8 or Season 6 deserves to be higher on this list. The reason why I chose Season 6 to go higher is because I think Season 6 is more consistently good. Season 6 dips pretty heavily after the first arc being the Bloodwork arc, and then leading into Crisis on Infinite Earths. But I don't think Season 6 ever dips into the place where I was really bored with the season. I think I just wasn't nearly as interested in what they were doing with like Mirror Monarch and with all the Eva stuff as I was with the Bloodwork stuff. I don't think any of the later stuff in Season 6 is as boring as a lot of the middle stuff in Season 8, because the kind of next part of Season 6 had still a lot of things going for it. We had kind of the setup for the Speed Forces, which, even though that ended up leading to one of the worst storylines in the show, I still think it was a really interesting story arc. Then it also tied into the Spectre and Crisis on Infinite Earths. We had all that different Harrisons with the faces. Mirror Monarch on her own was actually a pretty interesting villain and a good way to kind of bring back a lot of stuff from Season 3 and stuff with Mirror Master. And I think that what the Bloodwork stuff is some of the best stuff the show's ever done. And I also think Season 6 just does a really good job at dealing with the effects of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Like, we had an episode where Cisco was straight up making a map of what has changed on the New Earth. And I remember loving that because I was going, thank you, this is kind of what we need, considering that, like, for Arrow, for example, the entirety of Arrow's history changed due to Crisis on Infinite Earths because Oliver, as the Spectre, or Oliver when he recreated Multiverse, brought back so many characters who died throughout Arrow. And The Flash is the same, where like early seasons of The Flash dealt with multiverse stuff or timeline stuff that would definitely change now that Crisis has rebooted the universe. So I really kind of like that, and I think that Flash and Supergirl are the two shows that definitely took advantage of the change of Crisis the most, but I think Flash did so even more than Supergirl, and I really like that. In third place is the season that I think everyone will put in a different spot, and that is The Flash Season 3, the season that a lot of people will kind of say was the point where Flash started to go downhill from an almost perfect first and second season. And Savitar was a bit of a weird villain. I think he had his moments for sure, but overall, they did not utilize the fact that it was Future Barry near enough. Like, the fact that it was Future Barry should have been a huge thing and something that we really dealt with, something that we really went into the psyche of what made this Barry different to our Barry, how we can stop our Barry from becoming that Barry sort of thing. And that's kind of where they dropped the ball. They instead really did spend far too much time on Savitar being in his big Transformer suit than, being the fact that this was Future Barry. Now, they put so many hints that this was in fact going to be Future Barry throughout the season, but we didn't deal with the fact it is Future Barry near enough, and that should have been the crux of the season in my opinion. But I think that this season is still so much stronger than a lot of what comes later. It's not as strong as Season 2, but I still think there's a lot of good in this season. And like I said, I need to rewatch a lot of these seasons, but I remember Season 3 still being very hype when I was watching it live. Like, there was not a whole lot of other TV on at the time that I was more interested in. Like, Arrow Season 5 and Legends of Tomorrow Season 2 were also on at this point, and I think together, the three of those were some great television. Flash Season 3 felt like a different era. We had H.R. Wells, we had the character Tracy, I think her name was, we had Julian Albert, played by Tom Felton. There was a lot of characters and things going on in this season that it felt like it was its own little era of the show that the later seasons dropped. Like, Season 3 doesn't feel like the first two seasons, but it also doesn't feel like anything from Season 4 onwards. It feels like this very specific kind of era of the show. I'd also almost go as far to say that this is the darkest season of the show. Like, this is the one season that really does feel very, very, very depressing, almost true and true. It's just a very unique season, and I like that. And I think that that's what sets it apart from the other seasons and is what keeps it so high, is that it has maybe the most rewatchable stuff in the entire show. And I just think it's a really good season overall. In second place, I have Season 1. Now, Season 1 was what made me fall in love with the show. I thought it was such a great first season to the show. I thought that everything they were doing was on point, and I think that there's not a single episode in Season 1 that I don't like or I think was not done well. I think the show was great. Everybody was great. Everybody was at the top of their game. The mystery with Harrison and who he is and if he's Thawne or not, and Eddie Thawne and all this sort of stuff really worked well, and it made for a great season of TV. I think you'll be hard pressed to find anybody who doesn't like Flash season 1. From what I see, a lot of people say the Flash season 1 is on par with like Daredevil and stuff, which is kind of insane for people to say that about an Arrowverse show. But I agree. I think season 1 of Flash is perfect. And also the connections to the Arrowverse never feel bigger than they do here with Arrow season 3. And overall, I miss this era of the show. And in first place, I have season 2. So I know a lot of people would disagree with me here that season 2 is not as strong as season 1. And I think season 2 has less consistency than season 1. I think that season 2 has some gaps in the good episodes sort of thing. Like the run up to the final episodes aren't the best in comparison to season 1, just building up and up and up. But Zoom is such a compelling villain. He's the scariest villain that the show has ever had. I would go as far to say he's the scariest villain in the Arrowverse. He is so good. His music is so good. The fact he almost killed Barry in their very first meetup. I think that the highest highs in this are the highest highs of the entire show. I don't think The Flash has ever really gotten as good as season 2 again. Now season 8 has come very close with some parts of it, but I think season 2 was kind of the last point of the show being A+, like top of its game, which is kind of unfortunate, but I absolutely love it. And this is also the first season to really deal with the multiverse, which means that this is possibly the most important season in the Arrowverse. Like when you think of it, Superman and Lois dipping away from Earth Prime, that wouldn't be possible without Flash discovering the multiverse, because then they would have need to make up even weirder excuses for why Superman and Lois isn't in the main Arrowverse. But I absolutely love season 2. I think it's fantastic. But that's just my opinion on the seasons, so if you disagree, that's cool. We can all have differing opinions about this. I know a lot of people probably have different rankings, but let me know what your ranking of the 8 seasons of The Flash is. How do you feel about the seasons? And we're hoping to 1K this year, so if you could subscribe, that will be a huge help. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and all of that. And I hope you have a great day.